Welcome into this week's edition of AWA Unleashed. We are the self-proclaimed preeminent #1 podcast and video stream dedicated to telling the stories and reliving the memories of our favorite territory, the American Wrestling Association, based out of our home base, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Well, not technically Minneapolis, it was Golden Valley, but I'm in the Minneapolis area. Not really Minneapolis. Well, my mailing address is Minneapolis, but I'm really in a suburb. So is Joe Chupik and Mick Karch, and they join me now. And I didn't want to give away our location, but I want people to know that we are based in the Twin Cities, in the hub. We are all in different parts of the metro, but we are indeed based here in the home of the AWA.
Absolutely, home base it is, and it started here, and it ended in the general vicinity. And
general vicinity,
you know, it kind of came to a halt, but glad that we're all here again. And boy, what response we've gotten to the first two shows, you know, talking about the All-Star Wrestling memories. Just great.
Can't wait for episode 3. But Chris, I got a question for you.
Okay,
we start off every show. We're the preeminent #1 self-proclaimed AWA podcast.
Yeah, that's my shtick. That's what I do.
And I love it. Very appropriate. Serious question.
Yes.
Are either of you aware of another AWA podcast? Don't mention them. We don't want to plug the competition, but are we the only AWA podcast?
To my knowledge, we are the only one that is dedicated specifically to the AWA.
So we are the major league of AWA podcast.
Oh my! Bravo!
Yes. We really are. And you know something?
That was just as good as Norm Macdonald setting up the moth joke with Conan O'Brien years ago. You guys know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You know, that was a brilliant setup, Joe. I didn't know where you were going, but the payoff, fabulous.
Very good.
Sometimes it does take a while, but speaking of setups, Chris, let's talk about our sponsors.
Let's do it. Mick, I know you had something you wanted to say.
I was just going to say, you know, not only are we the major league, but to take an NWA quote from the 1980s, where they said, "We wrestle, we podcast." That's what we do. We podcast.
Oh, we will podcast your face off.
You're damn right we will.
That's what we will.
That's right.
But if you've got a face and you don't want it to be off, you need some pizza to put in your mouth, which is on your face before we podcast your face off. But that being said, you see the logo up there, 7th Avenue Pizza. It is the best frozen pizza on the market, you guys. It is, believe me, body by pizza. That's what I do. 7th Avenue Pizza, absolutely fantastic. Matt and the entire crew. It's all over the Twin Cities. And check them out. A whole bunch of different retailers. If for some reason you can't find them in your area, let me know. Hit us up in the comments. Hit me up on Twitter at AWA Unleashed. At CM Tubbs. You can hit us up on Facebook, 7thAvenuePizza.com. As well, guys, if you like some swag, and I believe the kids call it drip nowadays. You guys look like you got some major drip.
I went to the doctor for that.
I believe there are wipes for that as well. But if you want some real drip, as the kids would say, rep the AWA Unleashed Army with the only place you can get your officially licensed AWA Unleashed merchandise, sodastickco.com. I think your dog wants. I think whose dog is that? Is that Sid?
Yeah, that's Sid, and I believe he's going to be ordering a T-shirt. Momentarily. I believe they have a line of canine T-shirts.
They do. I think it says preeminent, by the way.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yes.
And appreciate it.
So when do the dog and the cat get into a dog chain match, Mick?
They are separated. They are separated by
different locker rooms. It's kayfabe. There's kayfabe at your house. Dogs and cats.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Fans and promoters want to see it.
locker room A and locker room B, and there is no connecting hall so they can discuss the finish either. So,
Do they go to you then? You talk
right.
to Mackenzie, then you talk to Sid. See,
I will give them their instructions.
This is where we're at. We are so personal here with you guys that we know the names of each other's pets.
Isn't that something? And we've also killed the first 45 minutes of the show.
All right, good show, guys. Good show. Great.
Hey, great stuff.
Best podcast ever. We told you we podcast your face off. Okay, so we do have a fun one here, you guys. This is part 3 of 3, where we're talking about some of the memories from All-Star Wrestling. And this is kind of where a majority of individuals, we've got the studio shows later on, like, you guys were talking. Later on, the arena shows, we're not talking about that. So there are some of them that I had memories of, but it didn't necessarily fit the criteria. So we kind of moved on from that. But these are all-star wrestling moments, guys. And we had really good response, like you guys said, all kidding aside. And we've got some really good ones here. And Joe, I'm going to let you take it, because the first one that we start out with was the little bit of a fracturing of a family, as you would say.
This one, if we were to rank all of the studio situations that happen in the AWA, if this one isn't at the top, I pretty much guarantee that it would be voted on near the top, if not at the top. And this is the breakup of the Bobby the Brain Heenan family. There we got Bobby on the left, Nick in the middle, and Ray Stevens on the right.
And by the way, is there a better name for a stable than a family? Like the Heenan family, it's just so good. I mean, so good.
They had the cult thing working before before many others did. But no, this one, I mean, I remember seeing this on TV. I was shocked, happy, and upset. Shocked that it happened, happy that Bobby and Nick finally got their comeuppance, but I was sad because I love to hate the Heenan family. So I was torn in so many ways, but unquestionably one of the biggest angles ever run on All-Star Wrestling.
No question about it. And, that was the culmination where Nick and Ray actually wrestled against each other after the breakup of the Heenan family.
That's a great action shot, by the way.
Like
just the back, the wrist lock that Nick's got Ray in. I mean, that is a great photograph right there.
And from my perspective, I was heartbroken when it happened because, of course, I'm the leader of the Bockwinkle Brigade at the time, and Ray was right up there as one of the heroes. But it was so well done, and again, we've talked that slow burn, that slow buildup. This wasn't an angle that was hot-shotted in one day on TV. It did kind of come out of the blue, but you could see it was percolating. And for weeks, they would not let Ray Stevens talk during their interview segments. The family would come out, in various incarnations of the family. Ray would try to say something, and Bobby or Nick or someone else would cut him off. And they just would not let him speak. Gets to the point where Bobby Heenan is being awarded the Manager of the Year trophy by Bill Abner, our good buddy. And I believe it was the 3rd or 4th time in a row that Bobby had been awarded that trophy, which he made a point of mentioning during the presentation. Well, it all comes to a head. And Ray is going to attempt to congratulate Bobby Heenan on his trophy, on his award. And again, they won't let him talk. Well, now Ray's had enough. He says to Heenan, "You little punk, you," because Bobby says, "Ray, shut up when I'm talking out here." And it all exploded, and the Heenan family attacked Ray Stevens. Ray Stevens demolished Bobby's trophy. Ray said, "I quit the Heenan family." Heenan says, "You can't quit, you're fired." And it was just legendary. What was great about this is that not only did they get a series of matches out of it between Nick and Ray on a singles basis, Ray also teamed up with Vern Gagne at one point after he went babyface in the Twin Cities area. And interestingly enough, a few years later, they re-teamed Nick Bockwinkle and Ray Stevens and never mentioned that there had been a split or any kind of a chasm in the relationship or whatever, just like it never happened.
Did they figure that wrestling fans would just forget, or I mean, that would have been perfect to play off of, because no internet, no way to find out. Like it would be so easy to sweep something out of the rug.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what it is. And in this day and age, you couldn't get away with it. But yeah, back then they just ignored it. Nick and Ray were kind of getting towards the twilight of their career when they re-teamed them. But again, they never explained it. But what a tremendous angle! Loved it.
When you first started describing it, Mick, fast forward maybe about 10, 12 years from when this incident happened, and there's another tag team in the AWA, and I'm digressing a little bit, but that's the Destruction Crew, where Wayne the Train Bloom would not let Mean Mike Enos talk. Now, they never broke up. It never happened. But it's just sort of another indication of professional wrestling. It recycled angles, slightly changed, updated, and whatever. But yeah, gotta love this business. The storylines, shall we say, are unique, even if they are replicated.
And what better three guys to pull this off than Stevens, Bockwinkle, and Heenan, and they did it just masterfully. Just one of the greatest angles, like you said, Joe, ever.
So we go from Bobby the Brain Heenan, that dastardly manager, to another guy who at least tried to maybe do it with a little bit of British class. Lord Alfred Hayes, or as my favorite wrestler used to call him, Elfinko Hayes. This next angle that happened involves both of those guys that I said, and it's Lord Alfred Hayes, Super Destroyer Mark II, and the Crusher. And then I'm going to save the last person, because let's go into the angle. Mick, go ahead and set up what happened and how our fourth guy got thrown. Crusher, damn, stay out of the blueberry pie.
Love that picture of Crusher.
That is classic.
Love it. That's from the cover of a Wrestling World magazine back in the 1960s. Super Destroyer Mark II, who had taken over from the departed Super Destroyer 1, Don Jardine. Don left the area, and Super Destroyer 2, of course, was our friend Bob Remus, Sergeant Slaughter. And Lord Alfred Hayes and Super Destroyer Mark II got into it with the Crusher on television. And, there was Crusher was kind of mocking Lord Alfred Hayes wearing a tuxedo. And, Crusher was hardly the guy that you would expect to come out in the tuxedo, but he did, just to kind of stick the needle into Lord Alfred a little bit. And Lord Alfred Hayes, of course, did not take too kindly to this. Super D Mark II, you'd never know that either. That would be Sarge with that chin sticking out of there. But Super D2 and Lord Alfred went after the Crusher on TV. They tore his tuxedo. And I don't know if Vern paid for the tuxedo like he did with mine, because, certainly that wouldn't go over very well. But Crusher needed a tag team partner to wrestle against Lord Alfred Hayes and Super Destroyer Mark II. And as you've said in the past, Joe, a guy just happened to be underneath the ring, adjusting the springs and boards or whatever underneath the ring. And he was in a full, work suit, which I had never seen him in before in all the years that he, was setting up and tearing down the ring. And that's our good buddy, George Scrap Iron Gadaski. And there's old George. Speaking of tuxedos, there's George right there. And again, George just happened to be in his everyday worker's outfit, workman's outfit, underneath the ring.
How about that?
Crusher pulled him into the interview area. And from that point on, it was George Scrap Iron Gdaski and the Crusher that were feuding with Lord Alfred Hayes and Super D Mark II. And of course, the storyline was the Lord Alfred was mortified that he would have to get in the ring with a commoner like George Scrap Iron Gdaski, the working man with dirty fingernails and sweaty armpits and everything else. And he was just appalled by that. The great part about this is that George was already a cult hero in the Twin Cities, as was, Kenny J. And they gave George that shot. They gave him the opportunity to shine and get some main events out of the deal. And it was absolutely brilliant.
As I recall it, when Crusher came out and started mocking Lord Elfinkel Hayes, was it not his tuxedo? And keep in mind, this is back in the 1970s, but wasn't it like the classic powder blue?
It was.
So,
yeah.
So they finally attack Crusher. They end up ripping the tuxedo apart. If I'm remembering correctly, they got to his sunglasses. He had one sunglass lens popped out, one dark one still in there, goes over and has the interview with Marty O'Neill, or maybe it was Gene, getting interviewed. Crusher goes off on a classic promo. And I remember it because I used this angle in one of the pay-per-views that I had done. So do yourself a favor if you want to see it. Look it up on YouTube. The pay-per-views have been pirated and uploaded to YouTube in many ways, shapes, and form, but classic Crusher, classic everything. Absolutely love this angle.
Poor George with the dirty fingernails. What a horrible insult to a guy. He probably hung out with what Lord Alfred referred to as the trollops and wenches, the women of the Twin Cities metro area and AWA and surrounding area. But great angle, and God loved George Gdaski. He loved every minute of it, and he deserved the spotlight.
Well, from British class of Lord Elfinkel Hayes to a Beverly Hills, California class, our good friend, rest in peace, Nick Bockwinkle, got into it with the truck driver, Belinski.
There's a classic picture of Nick, and I knew this particular memory would ring true with you, Joe, being the Belinski fan that you are. Our good friend Frank Shields, the late Bo Belinski, who, boy, I tell you what, he was a journeyman wrestler, and he had worked as the Wrecker. He had worked as, Bruiser Frank or whatever else, and he came into the Twin Cities AWA area at the time that there was a nationwide trucker strike. And the AWA, as wrestling is known to do, kind of jumped on the opportunity to play off what was really happening in the real world in the news, and Bull was an out-of-work truck driver. And it was only a natural that he would team up with somebody like the Crusher, the working man's tag team combination. Bull had been here for a while, and Nick Bockwinkle, on the other hand, had come in November of 1970. So we're about 6 months into Nick's time here in the AWA, and he's starting to establish himself as a pretty serious contender. Well, they do this angle on television, and again, simple. The simplistic is the best. Bo Belinski wrestles Nick Bockwinkle on TV in a 2 out of 3 fall match. At the end of the first fall, and that is the concluding moment. How we get to this is at the end of the first fall, Bull was attempting to leapfrog over Nick Bockwinkle, and he didn't quite get there. And Nick's head caught Bull in the lower abdomen into the nether region, and they had to stop the match because Bull was injured after that first fall. Bockwinkle, being the great gregarious guy that he was, said, I'm going to give this guy a couple of minutes to recuperate, and then we'll go to fall number 2. Well, Nick's couple of minutes to recuperate turned into about 30 seconds. Nick was never known as a very patient guy, and he climbed to the top rope, as you saw in that photo, and he jumped on the rather ample exposed midsection of Bull Belinski. And sad to say, and this is actually a fact, from that point on, Bull's AWA career, the trajectory kind of went downward. He started being more of a mid-card guy than a main event guy, although they did bring him and Nick back for a couple of matches here in the AWA area. Didn't draw very well. I asked Nick about it, and he said nobody expected that Belinski was going to handle my case back then, so nobody bought a ticket. But nonetheless, this is really, in my estimation, what established Nick Bockwinkle as a consummate heel, and a big star here in the AWA. His association or his run-in with Bull Belinski.
Nick, quick question on Nick. So, I mean, he appeared on an episode of The Monkees on Hollywood Squares. Was all of that pre-November of 70 when he arrived?
Yeah, yes, it was. The Monkees, the Hollywood Squares, this is all 1960s stuff. He was on an episode of Hawaii Five-0, I believe in 1968 or 69. So this is kind of while he's wrestling out on the West Coast, Los Angeles and Hawaii and that area. So he was kind of a known commodity there. So, he branched out into other stuff besides pro wrestling and came here from Atlanta, actually, in November of 1970. Nick had wrestled extensively down in Georgia, was the Georgia heavyweight champion for a while, and then came up here in November of 1970. I believe the Belinski angle was probably April-ish of 1971.
Yeah, I've just learned something about our good friend Nick Bockwinkle. So another angle that happened around that time involved Dr. X, and this one actually ended up being a tragic situation. Mick, I don't remember it, but tell us about Dr. X and the wrestler who ended up dying after a match.
It is a tragic situation, and unfortunately, it was not the first or last time that a wrestler died after a match or during a match in pro wrestling. What happened here in the Twin Cities, and again, this is on All Star Wrestling. Dr. X is a well-established heel villain here in the AWA, at least a few years away from his babyface turn. And he's wrestling a guy by the name of Guy Taylor. And Guy had been a journeyman wrestler around the country, and he was actually living in Minneapolis at the time, wrestled pretty extensively as an AWA enhancement guy on television. So it's your typical, there's Guy Taylor. Typical match, nothing real spectacular about it. What was interesting is that Guy Taylor at one point in the match, and I noticed this, and I'm a teenager at the time, something happened where a guy hit the back of his head on the lower rope strand at some point in the match. And it looked like, oh man, this guy, that could be pretty serious stuff. Well, turns out, and I'm not making a definitive correlation, I'm not a coroner, I'm not going to, go there at all. But Guy Taylor actually, at the end of the match, he's waiting to get his paycheck from Wally Carbo back in the control room. And the guy collapsed and died shortly after the match, right there at the TV studio. They couldn't revive him, and the cause of death was ruled a heart attack. So, again, not to cast any aspersions on what happened, but I just thought it was kind of coincidental. It looked like he seriously had snapped his neck, and whether or not that led to anything, I don't know. But so you didn't see, of course, Guy Taylor collapsing or anything on TV. But he was just, 25, 30 years old, something like that at the time. So out of the blue, definitely a tragedy. Guy Taylor and Dr. X incident back, I believe, 1968.
Wow. Didn't even know that happened. Well, let's go from a journeyman, enhancement talent / jobber to another one. We're going ahead probably a little under 20 years later. This one I remember because I was a part of production crew wise. We're going to Jake Milliman, and I'm assuming that this is the turkey on a pole match.
It is.
Against Colonel De Beers, and it was done in a studio, and yes, there were no fans. So there's the setup for it. Mick, take it away, and I'll fill in whatever blanks because I saw that match way too many times on my end.
You know what, Joe? And I actually was going to say I'm going to defer to you on this in a lot of ways because it was such a dismal time period for the AWA. They're in an empty studio with that pink backdrop, as I recall. There's the good Colonel, Ed Wiskoski, Colonel De Beers. And they're having a turkey on a pole match. I'm quite sure that it's not the first or only time that a wrestler, has had a pole shoved up his ass, some turkey in a wrestling match somewhere along the line. But there you see Jake holding the turkey, and there's that massive throng of 2 or 3 security guards. The reason that they had security guards, of course, and the whole ridiculous premise behind the closed studio was that too many wrestlers were interfering in each other's matches. Things were getting out of hand, so they're going to ban fans from the studio. They're going to ban other wrestlers from interfering. They're going to have security guys, as opposed to saying we aren't drawing shit anymore at the arena, so we might as well just do a closed studio setting. Nonetheless, Jake Milliman went over. He defeated Colonel De Beers in the turkey on a pole match, climbs up and extricates this poor turkey, Tom Turkey, I believe, from the pole and carries it down in victorious fashion. And I think if you were to ask Ed Wiskoski, Colonel De Beers, where this match ranked in his illustrious career, I don't think it would be right near the top.
There was just so much wrong with the match. I gotta say that the underlying premise of the Team Challenge series, when I remember talking to Greg about the whole idea when it was first hatched, and I'm like, something different, getting teams and getting some points, and it's like, okay, maybe it'll work. But then you go into a pink studio and you got a turkey with a pole shoved up its ass to be a part. Talk about going downhill fast. And Jake, I'll give it to Jake. He got over he got over Colonel De Beers on All-Star Wrestling, and a journeyman wrestler. And I think it's safe to say that Jake lost more matches than he even came close to winning, but he was a fan favorite, thanks to Jesse and his whole give Jake a break gimmick. So Jake had a following. But this entire match and the whole Team Challenge series should have been followed into the dumpster where the fire had already commenced for the AWA, sadly.
For me, I saw the Team Challenge series, and I was a young kid at the time, maybe I don't know, 12, but not really that young. But to me, I didn't know any better with the AWA. I didn't realize what it was. I knew that something just seemed a little weird with it because I was like, okay, this doesn't look like any other wrestling that I've ever seen. I do like the idea of the Team Challenge series, and I know that we had planned on doing a show, and we're still going to do a show. Yes. We've had some things that have been moved around, but I will say Jake Milliman to me was one of my all-time, and still is one of my all-time favorites, Jake the Milkman Milliman. And we've kind of mentioned between that and George Gadaski, one thing I kind of get the feeling from here, guys, is that one thing that's missing now from long-term storytelling is, yes, we see the cat in the blinds, is the enhancement talent really getting an opportunity to shoot to that next level. Like we don't have those. I mean, maybe the WWE had James Ellsworth, several years ago, but outside of that, we don't have these squash matches and these guys that all of a sudden they get thrown into this and they get their rub, their shine. We don't see that anymore.
Chris, you're so right. And what will happen nowadays, if they're going to do it at all, they'll introduce some guy in some city as being from that city, to pop the crowd a little bit. This is Joe Blow from Antioch, Illinois, or whatever it is. And so the crowd's real excited about this.
That's a random pull. Yeah.
Yeah. But what happens is that the crowd will start chanting, "Let's go Jobber. Let's go Jobber." And to talk about how the business has changed over the years, but the Kenny Jays, the George Gadaskis, the Jake Millimans of the world had paid their dues in the AWA. That's the thing. They had ingratiated themselves to the crowd. They were cult heroes. So every once in a while, Vern would give them the shine. And I would have to say, if you think about it, that Team Challenge Series may as well have been relabeled the AWA Team Poultry Series, because not only did they involve the turkey in the match, but if you remember, the team of Blumininas, I believe, were in the fried chicken contest at Popeyes. So the AWA, I mean, my God, really, this is the Gene Kaniski, Vern Gagne, Nick Bockwinkle promotion. I guarantee you, had they lasted a little bit longer, the turkey would have had surgery and probably teamed up with somebody in a tag team title match. I get that's the way it was going.
You're not wrong, Mick, and I want to go back to the enhancement talent. I'm going to call them jobbers. That's what we called them back in the day.
Yep.
Not only did they get their break and receive some adoration from the fans, but it was because of the type of people that they were in the locker room and behind the scenes. Vern didn't just throw them in there. I mean, all three of these guys they endeared themselves to the front office. They did what they were told. They did what they were asked to do. They didn't bitch. They didn't cry. They did what they needed to do. And so Vern repaid them by getting them into these angles. And so well-deserved on all of them. As far as the Team Challenge Series, oh man, there's not a big enough shovel to bury that in my memory, but it is indeed and was indeed a part of the AWA, including our next angle. This one, this was an interview. Larry Nelson, who gave me the moniker Polish Joe, was interviewing there's Uncle Larry. God, he was so damn good. He would hit the countdown mark. With a whole nother story with Larry. But Larry is interviewing Al DeRusha to promote small towns, because all of the smaller high school shows that were done back in the 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s, Al DeRusha with Assured Promotions, and Assured was spelled DeRusha backwards, by the way.
Really?
But Larry's interviewing Al DeRusha, and shortly into the interview, this beast of a man breaks through the back interview wall that, by the way, my dad had constructed. The wall was gimmicked, and the blaster breaks through the wall. Now you can see the picture there with the whole all long arm black sleeve.
What would you say, that he blasted through the wall?
No, because when he first broke through the wall, he actually stumbled. Not as bad as what was the gimmick in the
Shockmaster?
Shockmaster.
Oh my God! He didn't fall and lose his his headgear like that. But the blaster did indeed have some issues. In fact, he ended up cutting the inside of his arm trying to break through the wall. But the blaster was originally, the gimmick was going to be the Master Blaster from the Mel Gibson movies. What the hell were those called?
Yeah.
You know what they are. But that was a whole gimmick, but then the copyright infringement, so they shortened it up to the Blaster, and the Blaster's career was shortened up as quickly as the name was. But this interview,
Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, by the way.
Thank you. The Mad Max movies. This interview actually, it's become a bit of a cult classic because of Larry's reaction and everything for it. In fact, because of this interview, it was the reason that I got asked to be on my very first podcast as a guest several years ago to discuss this angle. And unique, different, special, you could include it all in there. It was fun. I was running camera on that angle, and it was fun. And we were only going to be able to do one take because there was only one wall to be able to break through. So no matter what happened, the interview needed to go on.
I believe the blaster's name was Gary Lindgren, and I don't know if he's still with us. I know that he had a serious medical issue somewhere along the way. So I honestly, I don't know. You mentioned Larry Nelson's reaction. And I mean, it is probably the last time I heard the expression, "What in the blue-eyed world are you trying to do? You broke the wall." Now, Larry is jumping up and down. I mean, he literally, ladies and gentlemen, this 6'3" guy with a beard and a microphone is jumping up and down in place. And he's just, I don't know if Larry's having a stroke, if he's having an orgasm. I'm not sure what it was, but Larry's reaction to that, you would have thought that World War III was starting. As far as the blaster is concerned, I don't know if that was going to be Vern's answer to Iron Mike Sharp with the long gimmick on the arm. It certainly didn't go anywhere. Either did the blaster. He wrestled around the AWA, around the horn for a very short time. And then, poof, the trapdoor opened and he was gone. But in AWA history, it's funny what people remember, because they'll say, hey, who was it? Was that Baron von Raschke that came through? No, it wasn't Baron von Raschke. It wasn't Skylo Low, Vern Gagne, or any other bald-headed guy that you want to mention. It was the blaster, and legendary for his brief few seconds in the AWA. And your dad, you said, put the wall together only to have it destroyed in a moment of fury by the blaster. Man,
we had set up the studio. Mick, you were there. You had done some interviews. You're in the studio, and we were on that blue wall.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So if you're looking at it this way, my dad had constructed a wall off to the right as you're looking at the interview set, and then another one in the back. And we used the intention was to put all of our equipment behind the wall, so the boys weren't fucking with it, which they did, every occasion, because, well, they were just grown-up teenagers.
Yeah.
This wall, the intention when it was built, we knew that was going to happen. Vern also knew that he was going to have to pay for my dad to come in to then fix that. Well, it was actually my dad and one of my brothers who helped my dad do construction back in the day. But much like my dad had done, my dad didn't construct stuff that was made for TV. In other words, light, movable, and let's go. No, my dad built a sheetrock wall and, something that was going to withstand, a couple of nuclear blasts. And blast it did with a blaster coming through this wall. And the other thing you mentioned, the orgasm part, that podcast that I did, that's what they referred. They called Larry Orgasmic Larry Nelson. And so you weren't off on that description whatsoever.
Isn't that something? Who would have ever thought that the podcast would come down to this, talking about Larry Nelson and orgasms? I mean, what is this, episode 75, and it took us that long to, Anyway,
I did not have that on my AWA Unleashed podcast bingo card, but nonetheless, that box has been checked.
Yeah. Nor will we have any AWA Unleashed swag with the word orgasm on it. I don't think, it may be a big seller, but I personally wouldn't wear one. The one thing that I wanted to mention, as opposed to the Shockmaster incident down in Atlanta, when the Shockmaster burst through a wall and then fell on his face, our good friend Fred Ottman. Mm-hmm. The difference here is that you did not hear Ole Anderson in the background saying, "God damn it, I knew that was going to happen." So it's a little bit different. What the hell are you doing? Now you got paws and everything else going.
Paws and tails and who knows what's going on.
Man. But I love that. And again, if Gary Lindgren is still out there, I don't know. If somebody knows about his whereabouts right now, let us know. Great angle. Brief moment in history in the AWA.
Yeah, I guess fortunately, though, the last thing I'll say about it is you talked about the angle not going anywhere. Gary disappeared quickly. Some would ask why it was even tried in the first place. Yet again, this was on the downslide of the AWA, and there were many things that were thrown against the wall to see if they would stick. And unfortunately, everything that was thrown at the wall, or most everything that was thrown at the wall at that time, was a super ball that came back and hit the AWA right in the face. And and this was one of them. But let's go on to an angle that actually, we're going back to, I believe, the later 1970s. And this angle did stick for a little while. The dastardly Iraqi Sheikh Adnan I like to eat garlic Casey against Tito Santana.
Well, there's that's the Adnan action figure, I believe. But Sheikh Adnan LKC, and just an interesting aside. When Adnan came into the AWA, and I see him on television, I'm recognizing him, and I could not place where I had seen this guy before. I knew he wasn't a Sheik, like Ed Fairhat, out in Detroit. But then all of a sudden he hit me. Damn it, that's Billy White Wolf. That's Chief Billy White Wolf, now wrestling as Sheikh Adnan LKC. Adnan didn't need a lot of impetus to get over as a heel. It was already tailor-made for him. The Iraqi invader coming into the AWA area, and Tito Santana, of course, very, very popular, was already getting his his wheels underneath him here in the AWA. And Adnan, of course, had a dancing girl with him, one of his harem.
Harem,
yes.
Hey, and, did you move over to block the cat, Mick? You move. There you go. You can.
Oh God knows I don't want to.
Okay, there you go.
Don't be upstaging the cat.
No, I can't.
Actually, you would kind of shift it off to the. I don't know if that's the way you hang, the way you shift, but your body itself had kind of shifted to the.
Well, you know what? The more the cat's on the podcast here, the more you're going to be stuck for royalties eventually for the cat.
Okay, go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. Sheikh Adnan, and he had his harem. He had his dancing girl, and Tito's in the ring. He's going to wrestle, and You hear the music of the dancing girl, the belly dance music, and she climbs into the ring, and she's dancing very seductively right near Tito Santana. Well, Tito's not doing anything. Tito's a gentleman, you know that. He's just kind of looking at the goods, as it were, kind of up and down a little bit. Well, Adnan gets pissed. And, Adnan grabs his harem lady, pulls her out of the way, kind of forcefully throws her to the other side of the ring. Tito doesn't like this. So he grabs Adnan from behind like, hey, what the hell are you doing? Don't strike a woman. Certainly not in my presence. The upshot was that Adnan hit Tito over the head with the sword. And Tito, I believe, juiced a little bit on television as a result of that. It firmly established Adnan as a master heel in the AWA. And Tito was just getting his, as I say, his wheels underneath him as a baby face, and the rest is history. But again, played to perfection and so simple. Nothing elaborate. This wasn't a $500,000 or $1 million production with pyro and everything else. This is a TV studio, and it just worked out so phenomenally well. One of the great angles in AWA history.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, this was before Tito was referred to as Chico Santana by Jesse, right?
Yeah, that is correct. That is beforehand. And again, it was just the little things, Joe and Chris, we've talked about this. You don't need to go apeshit and have a guy, coming off a scaffold or a balcony on somebody through a table, which has obviously been gimmicked. Just get in the ring, have the one camera focused on what's going on in there, and you've established who's who. And that was the beauty of All-Star Wrestling.
It's the emotion. It doesn't have to be. I feel like today's angles are more built on the physical, the moves, and this and that, whereas this was the emotion. This was the character interaction between 2 or 3 individuals, and it was executed more so because of the personalities and not necessarily the big spots, the things that make you go, this was awesome or holy shit.
You're 100% correct. And when you talk about emotion, the wrestling fans had emotional connections to the wrestlers back at the time. I mean, they seriously hated the Sheik, and they felt this sympathy and empathy for Tito Santana. Nowadays, I don't think there is that connection. I think the fan involvement right now is we're supposed to do this. This is the way we're supposed to react. But back in the day, again, simplistic, but brilliant.
Very good point. I have to ask or state, it's a different time. And I genuinely don't know that if this angle played out today, that it would be over as it was at that time. Is that because, I'm not even going to ask the question, I'm going to state it. The bar has been raised so many times in so many ways. I use the Mick Foley Undertaker bumps through the top of the cage, off the top of the cage onto it. When you raise the bar so high to get that reaction, now all of a sudden the little simplistic things that used to be over are now like, what? That's all? For better or for worse. It's like we've jumped the shark already in professional wrestling, and I just don't think we could go back to it. But for its time, a lot of the angles we've talked about in the last 3 episodes, the simplicity and the genius of getting these angles started and then carrying them on. It's a different time. It's a different era, for better or for worse.
Sometimes less is more. Less is more.
And fortunately, and I'm still involved in indie wrestling, and I do see a lot of that simplicity. I mean, mostly because they have to. They don't know if they're going to get the same guy back next month. It's not like, indie wrestling today. I'll compare it. It really, I'll call it like it's like the AWA used to be on a smaller scale.
Sure.
But the difference again is the indie wrestlers, you don't know that they're going to be there month to month. Couple of them you are, but you're not going to be able to have a long form angle run out for the most part. But the simplicity is still there in your indie wrestling. By the way, support your indie wrestling, because these are the guys, not all of them, but you're going to see some great wrestling. You're going to see some guys who are going to make it to the big stage at some point. So support that. Yeah. Back to the AWA. I miss all of these old angles. I really do. They've brought up so many great memories. Even having a pole stuck up a turkey's ass, even talking about Larry Nelson's orgasmic response. Classic, just classic stuff. And I love that we can talk about it here on AWA Unleashed.
Joe, you hit it right on the head as far as raising the bar is concerned. You would think that the Mick Foley Undertaker situation would have been like the penultimate. That would be it. But they're continuing to raise the bar. And all you got to do is go look at some old ECW footage when you talk about the bar that's been raised and how far they will go these days in wrestling. Once you set that standard, it's exactly like you said. Everything else is just like, yeah, okay, now what? If you think about the last 3 weeks of memories that we've been doing here, guys, it has all been about a single situation in the ring with two wrestlers and maybe a bottle of Geralac or a wall or, hitting a guy over the head. That's it. And it's that simple. And I don't think the modern day wrestling fan, like you say, Joe, they'll look back on that and say, yeah, so what? Well, where's the fire? Where's the four tables these guys are going through? Where's the thumbtacks? You didn't need them back in the day. It was a simpler time. And hopefully when we do shows like this, we can rekindle some of the memories and maybe, teach modern day fans, a few things.
And speaking of Tito Santana here, guys, we got about 5 minutes left. Mick, tell us something about Tito Santana that you want the fans to know.
We're going to get it. We have been pursuing Tito Santana to be a guest on our show, on our podcast. And Tito's career, legendary, of course, in all the territories he worked, but his run in the AWA was superb. And I have been in contact with Tito. He has just retired from his full-time teaching position out in New Jersey. So his schedule has freed up a little bit. Sometime in the next couple of weeks, I think, Chris, you might have a tentative date. We're going to have Tito Santana on the show, and I am absolutely ecstatic about it. One of the real nice guys in the business.
Yeah, tentatively, the drop date for Tito Santana. Next week, we've got Troy Peterson from the Dan Gable Luthez Museum, because we're going to be in Waterloo. So we're going to drop Troy, because we're going to, I want to, talk about the Hall of Fame. There's a lot of really cool things. And I've met a lot of really awesome people that are now friends. Last year, my first time. So we're going to go back this year, going to be part of the podcast collective. Thrilled to be a part of that, reconnect with some old friends, Mick, and, hopefully meet some more new ones. And then Tito Santana hopefully should be the week after. So tentatively July 11th, mark your calendars, because that is going to be Tito Santana and his AWA run. So that should be fun.
And of course, we'll keep people updated. And the one thing I would say about Tito Santana, Chris, you were there, when we saw him at one of the local events. Tito actually said to me, I haven't forgotten. I'm going to do your podcast. Just let me get, the school year out of the way.
But that was after you slipped him. It appeared to be like a $50 bill. So, I mean,
I'm going to call bullshit. Karch isn't getting anything out of his wallet.
No, that's true.
No. I was going to say, Chris, you're being really generous if you think I got $50.
Might have Monopoly money, maybe.
Maybe, might have been. I'm still paying the Vern Gagne estate the millions I cost him over the years, so I don't have a lot of wiggle room. But Tito Santana, to my knowledge, never wrestled as a heel. If he did, maybe once or twice. Tito was a great, great guy. Worked with him in the AWF. One of the producers was Sergeant Slaughter. So this is going to be really, really fun stuff. We'll talk to him about Adnan, and we'll talk about the High Flyers and Rick Martel and Bockwinkle and what have you. So mark the date down. I'll stay in touch with Tito, and if there's any change in the schedule, of course, we'll let you know.
Yeah, as they say, cards subject to change. We get about 3 minutes here, guys. Let's get to some shout-outs, and then we'll wrap it up. Mick, why don't you go first?
My friend, our friend, Scott Heddle. Scott is such a loyal wrestling fan. He's been around the business forever, loves the AWA, loves the local indie scene, and he loves our podcast. And he is one of those guys that continuously will send us messages of support and gratitude that we're doing what we do. And Scott Heddle, God bless you.
And my shout out this week goes to Michael Brada out of Chicago, longtime wrestling fan. He's provided some photos for me for Power Town Wrestling. Do yourself a favor, check out Power Town Wrestling. The new action figures, phenomenal. But I'm giving the shout out to Michael because dual purpose. One, it fills in who I do my shout out for this week. And I'm going to say, you want a shout out, go ahead and message me on Facebook. Give me some information and maybe you can get your shout out. But Michael's getting it this week because we had talked about last time about the Dr. X sitting in the audience thing. And Mick, I had asked you if you were aware if this situation had happened before. And Chris, before I get into it, do you want to say something? You were holding up a couple of fingers.
No, this is 2 minutes. This is your 2 minutes.
Shit. Give me 10. Kidding. But Michael Brada messaged me and said that back in the early 60s in Buffalo, they did a small angle with a young, clean-shaven Ox Baker in the studio before he was finally approached by the promoter to become a wrestler. So I didn't know that. So fans, anyone that's listening out there, when we say something, we've said it before, if we're off on a time, an exact date or whatever, you get the gist of it. Please correct me, educate us on what was the proper time. This podcast is not gospel. We're here to share and have fun with you. And if we can provide information like Michael Brada did and share that with you, hey, all the better. So Michael, thank you for sharing that information with us so that we could share it with our fans.
And I'm going to go with another Michael. I'm going to go with Michael Paul from Sarasota, Florida. Just found our podcast and he's been catching up. And Michael, here's for you, my friend. Here is your shout out. So thank you for finding the podcast and for, subscribing and just watching and listening. So that'll do it for this week, guys. We do have Troy Peterson next week from the Dan Gable Luthez George Tragos Museum, Hall of Fame in Waterloo. And I'm really excited because we're going to have some fun there in just a couple of weeks. And hey, what happens in Waterloo stays in Waterloo, right?
It does. And, if we have to steal it, if we have to use skullduggery, we're winning that trivia championship this year.
I'm hoping to be able to make it. I really am. But we'll see what the Minnesota Aurora do.
And by the way, I'm going to have my Google ready to go.